This is the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. The country was partitioned over 65 years ago, and the 6 counties of Northern Ireland remain part of the United Kingdom. From these observation posts, the British Army, in cooperation with the Irish Army and the Garda, maintain the border today. Belfast, Northern Ireland. At first sight, the city streets may look like those of any other in the United Kingdom. But here, every side road and alley is logged, every building documented. The movements of people are checked and their associations monitored. The British Army's computerized intelligence files even record details of room layouts in private houses, the color of the furniture, the patterns on the wallpaper. The reason for such unprecedented surveillance of a civilian population is the Provisional IRA, one of the most feared guerrilla armies in the world. The security forces know that when the IRA is not in action, it is planning and preparing. For this reason, all Catholic areas of potential support for the IRA, here in Belfast and across the entire province, are kept under constant watch. In this atmosphere of saturation surveillance, silence, invisibility, and anonymity are the weapons of survival for the IRA. Now, for the first time, this silence is broken, as former leading IRA members speak openly and give us the view from behind the mask.
I certainly do not like using violence. I don't want to be involved in using violence. I think weapons in the world, if they can be taken out, would be a much better world.
This is Brendan Hughes, recently released from the Maze prison after serving 13 years of a 20-year sentence. For most of his adult life, he was an active member of the Provisional IRA, a marked man constantly on the move and almost daily facing the threat of violent death. Throughout the 1970s, Hughes was in the thick of the action, both in the fighting in the streets and in the conflict within the prisons. How was it that he came to be so involved?
The particular part of the Lower Falls I lived in was off the Grosvenor Road, which was a predominantly Protestant area. Lower Falls is split by the Grosvenor Road, and one side was all nationalist Catholic areas. I grew up in the other side of the road, which was predominantly Protestants, and most of my youth was spent with Protestants. In fact, by 1969, a lot of people on the other side of the road believed me to be a Protestant, because I never associated too much with those people. Although my whole family background is Republican. My father was Republican, my grandfather, they were all in prison. And I suppose it was inevitable that sooner or later I would fall in that line. But initially, and during my youth, it was all Protestant people I knocked about with. It was a reasonably happy enough youth. Very poor. My mother died when she was very young. My father was left with 6 kids. I was the second oldest. And we were all at school when she died. My father worked all his life, carrying tiles. For years, I remember now looking at the Belfast Telegraph and seeing notices in the Belfast Telegraph, Catholics need not apply, which we accepted. My father had a very Republican name, which was Kevin Barry Hughes, and he used to say to me that it was a waste of time him applying for a job anywhere except the Bilton site, because he wouldn't get it.
The most enduring feature of sectarianism in Northern Ireland has been discrimination in employment. Even today, a Catholic here is more than twice as likely to be unemployed as a Protestant. Discrimination against Catholics, however, has never been restricted to employment. Back in 1969, it took an openly political form. One person, one vote did not exist. Instead, there was a property qualification. Only householders could vote. Boundaries were carefully drawn to ensure Protestant-controlled councils, even in majority Catholic areas. To control the council was to control the allocation of houses. Protestant councils deliberately restricted Catholic access to housing because to have a house was to have a vote. In 1967, the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association was formed to campaign for the democratic reform of the Northern Irish state. During 1968 and 69, their marchers were repeatedly attacked by the Northern Irish police, backed by Protestant extremists. These attacks culminated in the full-scale invasion of Catholic areas by police-led mobs. For Catholics, it was clear that a peaceful attempt to reform Northern Ireland had led to the destruction of their communities. They decided to defend themselves.
August 69 came about when the riots started on the Falls Road, and I was immediately caught up in that, and I took part in the riots on the Falls Road. At that period, I was Catholic, and I was a practicing Catholic, and the whole reason, almost, for the defence of the Falls Road was the defence of St. Peter's Chapel, which we all believed, and the priest told us, that the loyalists were trying to get down the burn, and everyone had to mobilise and go and defend the Catholic Church, which we did. There wasn't much political thought in my head. There wasn't any political thought in my head at all at that period. All I was interested in was there was people throwing petrol bombs, there was people burnt out, and I felt for the people who were being burnt out. That's when we were faced with it, what republicanism was about, and what it meant to be a Catholic. Right? Because here it was the B specials on the streets, the RUC in the streets, and on the Falls Road, the RUC actually opening up, right, with machine guns and so forth. And the next morning, the casualty list, the burnt out houses and so forth. I toured the areas, helping people out with their furniture, what furniture I had left, into the safer areas of West Belfast. That whole period of 69 brought about the conflict about where you are, what you represent, and what do you do from there on. And I think it was from there on in, I became a Republican. I didn't become a political or a politicized Republican at that period, but I certainly became maybe a rebel, not knowing exactly where I was going, but certainly some form. I felt anger, I felt bitterness, I felt what it was like for my father, for my youth, and that I never had a chance anyway of getting anywhere unless I left the country or stayed in the boats or whatever. But at home, I didn't have much of a future. I felt all that. I can articulate it now. I didn't then.
I was in England at the time, and a friend of mine was shot dead, Barney Watt, here in Ardown. And I came home to attend a funeral originally, and seen what actually was happening, that it wasn't just a one-off thing, that the people were getting petrol bombed, were getting burned out of their houses, people were getting shot dead on the streets, simply because they were Catholics.
Because as far as we were concerned, Ardown had suffered most and was never, ever going to suffer again. That was one vow that we all made as a sort of a pledge to each other. That was Paddy McAdory and Jerry McDade, people like that, Terry Clark. As far as we were concerned, never again would we let Ardown be burned and abused and terrorised as it was.
In an atmosphere of impending civil war, British troops were sent onto the streets to secure the Northern Irish government and to restore stability to this part of the United Kingdom. Relations between Catholics and the British Army soon deteriorated. In June 1970, British soldiers had pulled back and allowed the small Catholic enclave of the Short Strand to be attacked by Protestant gunmen. Catholics turned to the IRA for protection.
I can remember my father getting my sister and myself, she was also young, down onto the floor in the living room in case the bullets came through the back of the house or happened to come through the walls. And then he went out to a neighbour to see if he could get us across the street and further into the area because we were right on the outside of it. I can certainly remember very vividly what went on that night. The shooting was continuous.
We had very few weapons, 5 weapons I think in total. That was including a revolver, an two M1 carbines and a Sterling submachine gun. And it was then that it was trying to position those weapons to take effect.
As far as we thought, we would be invaded that night, that we'd just be run over, because as far as we could judge, they didn't want us there. They never wanted us there, and they wanted us out. They wanted to drive us out. And I didn't know until years later, when I was older, that there were a very small number of IRA men in the area that night. Some of them had been brought in from other areas, and luckily they were able to hold them off. I mean, you're talking about 30,000 against 1,500. And if it hadn't been for the IRA that night, I probably wouldn't be here.
On the Loyalist side, it was reported 8 casualties, and on our side, 2 casualties suffered. Henry Michael Home was killed, and Billy McKay was badly wounded.
After that particular incident, the people of the area identified totally with the Republican movement. That had been the rebirth of the provisionals, the 27th of June. Every door in the district was open to them. Everybody was supportive of the movement at that particular time. And the recruitment after that particular incident was enormous. The lame and the blind wanted to be involved in the IRA.
The IRA successfully defended the Short Strand. But in response, 5 days later, the newly elected Conservative government ordered the British Army to impose a 3-day curfew on the Catholic Falls district to search for the weapons used in the Short Strand battle. In the fighting that followed, the British Army shot and killed 4 unarmed civilians. Catholic alienation from the British Army was complete.
The British Army attitude towards the people changed. They became very aggressive, and the people soon realised that they weren't in there for the defence of the people. They're there to bolster up the Stormont government. They're there to bolster up the RUC. And they soon realised that they're still the same enemy.
The Brits themselves started to react when they hadn't got the favourable approach of the people then. They turned on the people and the young people in the area, and they actually played into the provisionals' hands. And eventually, people were in the state of mind that they couldn't take any more from the Brits. They were calling on the Republican movement and the IRA to take action against the Brits.
Behind the barricades, the IRA had total control. Armed men walked the streets, armed IRA men walked the streets. Gun lectures were given at corners of streets and on houses of the streets, and houses within the nationalist areas. These people had a lot of influence on myself. They used to talk about the need to remove the British presence from Ireland. All this I became involved in. I became part of these people, and I became part of the struggle that was taking place at this time.
We had built up guerrilla warfare in Ireland over the years, even from the 20s. And this was the first time that urban guerrilla warfare was seen to be done.
If we've seen something wrong, we rectified it, be it going out and using violence against the people who were using violence against us to keep them off the people's back.
In August 1971, the British government introduced internment without trial, a measure that failed to halt the IRA or undermine their support. In January 1972, British paratroopers shot dead 14 unarmed civilians attending a peaceful anti-internment protest. These deaths, which incensed the nationalist people, strengthened popular support for the IRA.
Well, I was 11 years old. The house has been getting wrecked with British soldiers in. Father, brothers were arrested, and going through the general harassment in the home and seeing what was happening in the streets, I eventually joined the IRA in the late 70s. Well, it was in the Mid-Falls area, and It entailed the carrying of weapons and the planting of explosives.
A classic ambush situation in Lower Falls was cross-section across street. You've got a street running this way and a street running that way. The RA would put out 4 riflemen, one at one house, one at this end of the street, like a cross-section. And whatever way the British Army came, be it along the street or along the street, they were attacked. And almost every time they came in, there was 1 or 2 casualties, British Army casualties.
You were on the call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay, it messed up your life sometimes, but you also accepted that it was going to cut in, it took priority. The actual sitting waiting is very, very boring at times, because if you're sitting at someone's house, you don't want to cut in the family too much, so you're inclined to sit away in the back room or somewhere out of the way, and then the family will want you to come in and have dinner and watch television, so it's like that there, you know, and you're always caught there. You don't want to. You don't want to intrude too much on it. You sit about enough a lot of time, just waiting and waiting and waiting. You hear a patrol coming, you can hear the armoured cars, or, you know, and it's just a sort of slight jumper, you know, because it's that expectancy, you know, or you might be going out to hit them, or they might be coming to get you, you know, and that there, it's something that I think it goes into your subconscious. You try not to let it show, because if everybody starts showing jumpiness or edginess, then everybody panics. You don't let it show because everyone's looking to everyone else to support each other.
Another form of attack was a lorry, hitting a lorry, hijacking a lorry, again sandbagging it, putting two armed men with rifles in the back of it and driving about the road looking for targets. This became common enough when the IRA received the RPG rockets, where the same thing again, the lorry sandbagged the RPG man on the back of the lorry with a rifleman for cover, and they would drive along the road, hopefully get in front of a Saracen and then attack the Saracen with the RPG rocket. Or if the Saracen was driving past down the road, opening up into the back of the Saracen with an RPG rocket, and the rifleman on the back giving cover.
Well, most patrols either had a rifleman who was a marksman or a radio person, and we reckoned that they were the 2 most important ones to take out. A radio man, because he would be the first one, if there was an attack made on him, he would be the first one to call for reinforcements. A sniper, because he would be the one, if there was any shots fired at him, he would be the one to sit down, seek a target, and he was reckoned to be their best shot, and he was more dangerous there. Because a lot of soldiers just fired in the air because they panicked, they hit the deck and they fired in the air. That he was reckoned to be more calculated, a good shot, so therefore he was a danger. Also, if you can take one of those 2 out, it helps her get away.
The Lower Falls was a perfect area for urban guerrilla warfare. The people were very, very close-knit. The area was a warren of yard walls, holes, and so forth. And there's station there to protect IRA people. Behind barricades, in the ghetto, under attack, under siege. We watched the Saracens, we watched the armoured cars, we watched the RUC come by. And we were in almost a liberated part of Ireland ourselves. And in fact, people even spoke of this, right, of the Lower Falls and nationalist parts of Ireland being actually free for the first time.
It was a general popular sense that, I remember being in Ballymurphy when just before Stormont was prorogued, and a man who had actually been alive when partition, which is only maybe 65 years ago, isn't that long ago, was absolutely cock-a-hoop at the fact that Stormont was away. He couldn't believe it. And we were standing in Ballymurphy. It was during a very heavy gun battle, which in that area was a strange thing because the gun battles always had audiences who were quite safe from the actual combat itself, but who used to stand and cheer from round a corner and had political discussions or any sort of discussions, almost like at a football match. This particular man was saying to me, Jesus, you'd never believe it, Stormont so well, the Beast Special, you'd never believe it. And I couldn't even understand. We had no sense in my generation of dealing with Stormont, or our only relationship was one of conflict. But this man had seen the whole slow grind of disadvantage in employment, of housing, of discrimination, of just being squeezed and pushed and hurried. And there, the whole symbol of it, the big symbol, was away with it. The Beast Specials were going. And in the streets of his area, the IRA were out there hammering down with the British Army. So there would have been a very popular sense of great change.
What people got to remember is that all of these people involved in taking on the British Army were ordinary people, civilians, labourers, tradesmen, seamen, whatever.
There were women like myself who have come from nationalist areas, who have maybe had people murdered by British soldiers. They've been through continual harassment, personal, and they saw friends of their own relatives getting interned, getting arrested, getting tortured in the early 70s, right through until today.
We weren't fighting for a pay, we were fighting because we believed in something. We weren't a paid mercenary, getting a wage.
June 1972 marked the peak of 3 years of relentless conflict. The British government agreed to direct talks with the IRA and a ceasefire was established.
Well, what actually happened at that time was that an arrangement was made after initial meetings between representatives and intermediaries between the Republican movement and the British government. A situation came about where an arrangement was made for our representatives to gather themselves in Derry, and what happened was we were taken by motor car to a field at the back of a housing estate in Shantallow. It's quite close to the Donegal border, and a helicopter landed in the field. We presumed that it was British soldiers who were handling the helicopter. We went with them to Aldergrove Airport, where we boarded an RAF plane and were taken to an RAF base just outside London, where we were met, we presumed, by members of the special branch or the British police. There were 2 very large cars placed at our disposal, and we were given an escort into Chelsea, where the meeting actually took place at the home of Paul Channon, who is presently one of the senior ministers in Thatcher's cabinet. And there we met with William Whitelaw, some members of the NIO at that time, and Mr. Shannon, who was also present.
My idea of politicians and statesmen got a terrible shock, because some of them they were very, very ill-informed or ignorant to a point of knowing what was happening, what was going on. It just didn't seem to want to know what was happening.
The initial impressions before we went into the meeting was that we were dealing with the most experienced diplomatic group of people in the world, and we accorded the British the respect of understanding that they are very, very experienced, that in terms of diplomacy and so forth we were very inexperienced, and all that we had to go on going into that meeting was our own basic honesty in terms of understanding the struggle that we were involved in and what we were attempting to achieve through that struggle.
We realised ourselves, listening to them, that all they wanted was a ceasefire, everything to remain as it was, the status quo to be maintained, and no change.
In the course of that meeting, I became absolutely convinced that the British weren't sincere or genuine. I also think that they realised, as a result of that meeting, that the Republicans weren't going to be conned into a lengthy cessation, that what they wanted was an upfront answer. And that answer couldn't be given at that meeting, an answer about the British presence, about an end of partition. So when the truce broke, in Lenadoon, my view of it was that the British government, having realised that they weren't going to be able to end the armed struggle by a series of small concessions or promises, simply allowed it to be broken on the slimmest pretext. And if one considers that it was broken by the British Army, and the British government knew of the circumstances, that vindicates my view.
The fragile peace broke down after just 12 days. Catholic refugees had been allocated housing, previously occupied by Protestants, on the Lenadoon estate in Belfast. British soldiers prevented them from moving in, claiming they feared territorial clashes. In the eyes of nationalists, the British had once again bowed to loyalist pressure. The IRA felt then that further negotiation was pointless.
Yes.
The orders are, if you can see a gunman, a man with a weapon, then you may shoot him. A man with a weapon.
Whitelaw said, well, if this breaks down, it's all bets off. Now, and I said, and I didn't speak enough of that during the meeting, well, that means all bets off, including the fact that you met us and so on. Some 14 months later, after I had been on the run, and I was arrested, and myself and a number of people were beaten fairly savagely over an interrogation centre, and a number of plainclothes British soldiers were engaged in the beating, and one kept sending me, "It's all bets off now, Jerry." Do you remember that?
After that truce of 1972, the IRA understood, right, and were convinced that the British Army were not, the British government were not interested in any sort of peace, and their only objective at that period, and at any period, was the defeat of the IRA. The IRA accepted that there was no truce, and we were into a full-scale war. Right? The British Army and the RUC pinpointed me as someone that they wanted. Right? They had raided my home, I raided my father's house, and on 3 or 4 occasions. I was told that I should not go back near the house. Right? I didn't, and from then, from that period, I was on the run. On the run meant living in different places, wherever you could, and at that period, there was no problem at all of finding somewhere to live. I could have went into any house in the Lower Falls, well, almost any house in the Lower Falls, and they would have put me off tonight.
The people of that community would have made sure that they would have billeted you and made sure that no one got next or near to you, including the British Army would have tipped you off when there was patrols and that type of thing around.
Movement couldn't have existed without the help of the people in the area, and that's a cliche now. People always tend to use that, or we can't survive without the help of the people. We couldn't operate against the British without safe houses, food, finance, cars, medical assistance, dumps, people, civilians even carrying weapons or carrying arms for us.
I myself was, on June 1973, been on the run for almost 3 years. I was in a house on the Falls Road. The house was surrounded, and the British Army were in the back and the front and came through the front door. Myself, Jerry Adams and Tom Cahill were then formally arrested, taken to Springfield Road Police Station. They tied me to the chair and tied my hand to a table, and over a period of about an hour just constantly hit each finger with a small toffee hammer, a small hammer used to break toffee, to the point that all my fingers were swollen up. Constantly beat me and asked me questions, where I was, where I'd been for this last couple of years, what I'd been involved in. They then produced this large spike, right? Put it on the chair and tried to force me down on it, onto the spike. At periods, they drew their weapons, cocked them, and fired them at my head. There was no ammunition in it, but I didn't know at the time. After about, let's say, 8 hours, the interrogation finished, and I was mangled, or handcuffed, feet and hands, and carried to another hut where British soldiers in uniform with weapons took over guard. Right? I was waiting to transfer to Lancash. While I was there, I was there for 2 or 3 hours. There was a constant flow of British troops, British soldiers coming in, and I got into conversation with them. And they were asking me how much money I got. I told them I didn't get any money. I didn't get any wages, which they find hard to believe. They believed me to be rich and getting loads of money every week. There was 2 in particular who I had a general conversation with about Ireland, about their involvement in Ireland. One was a Newcastle fellow, a Geordie, who was generally sympathetic. The other guy was a Londoner who was totally hostile. And at one period, they actually started the argument among themselves as I sat there. They came to take me away, the Geordie guy says, good luck. The Londoner says, good luck and I hope you get 20 years, you bastard. Right? Later on, in the early hours of the morning, they transferred us to Castlereagh Holton Centre, where the next morning they moved us by helicopter to Lancash internment camp. The first day I got there was relief and the comfort of being among comrades and friends after coming through the interrogation. Shortly after that, you know, the feeling was, how do you get out of this place?
To have the country united, bring these troops out, and the people of all Ireland have an election to elect whichever government they see fit to run the country. That's what the aims and objects of the provisional IRA is.
This is Martin Meehan, seen here in the early 1970s when he was a leading Belfast IRA man. He too was arrested and interned without trial.
They brought me in and I was beat from head to toe. Like, it hit me with everything but the kitchen sink. But I remained conscious through it. And actually, in fact, I pretended to be unconscious. And then they brought me to Hollywood on a stretcher and then put me through all sorts of indignities. Put me in front of a firing squad, made me dig my own grave, deprived me of food, sleep, and they pulled the stitches back out of my head with a needle, and then ripped my hand with a needle across here, just here. Fired blanks at my head. Brought me up in a helicopter, put a hood over my head, and I thought it was miles up in the air, and put a rope around me and told me they were going to throw me out. And then they brought me to Crumlin Jail and interned me. Actually, it was a detention order before they interned you. And after 23 days, there was Terry Clark and 8 other remand prisoners in a different wing had escaped at a football match. And we were in C wing, we were interned. and all sorts of security happened after they escaped, and we thought there was nobody else would ever get out of here again. The engineers, army engineers, came in and made all sorts of security measures, and they let us out to a football match on the football pitch 2 weeks after the initial escape, and we were walking around. We actually doing linesman. I was in a walking stick. Me and a fellow called Mickey McGuire, and walked across a manhole cover, and it started rattling. And I looked down and I seen the grass going over it. So initially I thought it would have been bolted to the ground. But we came around again, and then I lifted it up with one finger, and there was 6 foot of a drop, water at the bottom. There was prison officers all around the pitch with walkie-talkies. There's barbed wire all over the place before you even get near the main wall. Well, I says if we could head down there during the half-time of the match the next day, and the lads could bluff they can't get in, they would stand a chance of getting away with it. So eventually we put the plan to the OC and the Crumlin Road Jail, Skin Burns, and he called us lunatics. You never get away with it, he says. They're on their toes since 2 weeks ago, since the initial escape, and they'll shoot you dead. So we pounded him all day long, and eventually he conceded, and he says, okay, he would let us go. He would do punch a spirit and wash his hands of it. But if it was a success, he would claim it, and if it was a failure, he would disclaim it. So we got a rope and a hook of a chair, and somebody came up with a suggestion to put a pound of butter on you from head to toe, something like a long-distance swimmer, you know, for the water, because it was the middle of the winter. And everything went according to plan the next day. We went down the manhole, the 3 of us, and in actual fact, the manhole barely fit 2. But how we got to the end, that I'd never know. And the water was up to my neck. And we stayed there till 12 o'clock that day, till 5:30 at night. And then we got out of the manhole, creeped round, and we were creeping around the main wall underneath the barbed wire, but we were cut to pieces with barbed wire, you know. And I says, hold it, lads, hold it. And they says, what? I says, there's a bit there down his knee, I says, with a rifle pointed towards us. And we sort of thought the game was up at this particular time, you see. And we're ready just to give up. And I says, I'm going to make a run for the wall anyhow. We've came this far, I'm not going to give up. So I started running to what I thought was a shoulder. And there was fog at this time. And I actually got till actually what I thought was a shoulder. It was a big cement mixer with a handle sticking out of it. But we got over the wall eventually, after about 10, 15 minutes. We made our way to the Falls Road, the safe house.
The cage that I was in, along with Jerry, was a more secure cage, cage 6, which had more security on it. And the bin lorry that we thought was a possibility of an escape on did not come in to cage 6, did not come as close to cage 6. So the stuff had to be carried from cage 6 over to the bin lorry. I went about 9:30. There was people there waiting, ready, waiting on me coming. They had a canvas bag. They had it filled with sawdust, dirt, the general dirt lying about the cage was filled with it. I got into the bag. They tied it up. I had a pen knife with me, and I had an orange stuck in my mouth for fluid in my throat. I had money, and I had the equipment to start a car, lift the bonnet and start a car for a quick start. We were heading out the gate, out the main gate of the prison. Now, normally, what was supposed to happen was that once the lorry got to the main gate, 2 squaddies, 2 British soldiers, would ram it with a spike. It was a big long bamboo thing with a spike on it. And I had been told from our intelligence people this no longer happened. Right? When we got to the main gate, it stopped. I heard the soldiers talking, and I felt the thing being pushed up the wagon. It was a large lorry with 4 sides on it with a big canvas over the top. And I knew exactly what was going on. Right? I heard and felt the thing coming up, and I was almost at the point of shouting, hold it, there's somebody in there. Right? I didn't, I spotted it out. They done it twice, they rammed it twice, and they missed me twice. Right? So once that happened, I heard them saying, it's okay, go ahead. The lorry started to drive out of the camp, and I knew once, there were 2 sets of ramps, and made a right turn, that I'd be out of the camp. I then began to make a move to get out of the bag. And I got rid of the orange out of my mouth, and since I did that, I got a mouthful of sawdust. I had a small pen knife in my hand. I was warm, I was sweating, I was soaking, I was suffocating. Right? I tried to cut the canvas bag with the small knife, and as soon as I tried it, right, the knife bent, the small pen knife bent backwards, right? So I couldn't cut the thing, and I dropped it. Right? I was stuck in this canvas bag with the knife lying somewhere in the bag. Right? So I panicked a wee bit, right? And I started to kick the bag. Right? And as I did that, more and more rubbish fell into the mouth and in the eyes. And we were heading up the Hillsborough Road at this time, and eventually my head came out first. My head, where it was tied, the bag was tied, came loose, and my head came out. And I got a mouthful of fresh air, right, which I'll never forget. It was beautiful. Right? But I also got a mouthful of sawdust and the eyes and my mouth. And I could see out the back, right, that we were on the Hillsborough Road, and the whole road was littered with rubbish, with me kicking to get out of the bag. There was tins of sawdust lying all over the Hillsborough Road. Right? And just as I got my head out and I seen that, the lorry stopped, right, at a set of ramps. There was an army station, an army billet, just as I got out of the bag, and they slowed down. Right? So I jumped back into the lorry again. I was out of the bag, I was lying on top of all the rubbish then. And I knew Hillsborough. There was a hill, right? And as you got to the top of the Hillsborough Hill, there was a sharp right turn and then a sharp left turn. Right? I waited till I got to the top, climbed out the back of the lorry, because I had to slow down to almost stop to make these two turns. And I began to thumb a left. Right? All this is going to sound a wee bit fantastic, but it's the absolute truth, right? I was walking along the road, and I turned around, and I found myself thumbing two jeeps full of British soldiers, right? They didn't stop, right? They drove on past me, right? And as soon as I turned around and seen the two jeeps, I thought they were onto me, right? That they were coming to get me, right? They didn't, they drove on past. And shortly after that, a car stopped. Right? I get in, and it was an Englishman, right, with a child sitting in the back. And I don't know to this day who he was. I suspect he might have been a prison officer. I don't honestly know. But he was English, he stopped and he gave me a lift. And there's a small child sleeping in the back. And by this time, one of my eyes was closed, and the other one was partly closed with the sawdust. Right? And he asked me where I was going. I said I was going to Newry. Right? And that's where he was going. So he asked me what happened to him. I says I was working on a sawmill there, I got something in my eye, and I'm going home to Newry. Right? So he drove me into Newry, and it was just getting dark at this time. It was about 4 o'clock or so when I got to Newry. And got out of the car, run over to the taxi stand, got into a taxi, and asked him to take me to Dundalk. Right? He began to drive me through Dundalk, through Newry. And we came through the city centre in Newry. I seen an RUC foot patrol. Right? And as we passed them, right, somebody shot one of them. Right? One of the policemen was shot, right? And he was shot dead that day, right? Just outside the Savoy Picture House in Newry, right? As we drove past. Right? So I knew there was going to be, if there wasn't a block already on, there was going to be one on. Right? So he was heading out of Newry town, heading up towards the border, and it's a hill there. You can usually see when there's a roadblock on. There wasn't any on, right? And I was in 2 minds where to tell him to hurry, you know, put the boot down and get up that road. Right? But I didn't, right? Because I didn't know who he was. But we're heading up the road, and I hear the Saracens coming behind us, right? And the Saracens come flying up with the sirens and all going, right? And they drove past, and it was dark at this time. And there's a car in front of us, and the Saracen pulled in the front, still driving, still heading on. The guy in front of us had his full headlights on, and it was shining right into the back of the Saracen, right? And the two British soldiers in the back were saying to him, dip the lights, right? And he wouldn't dip the lights. And I says, thank God, right? They're going to pull them in and let us go. Right? So they pulled in, set up the roadblock, let him go, and pulled us in, right? And they pulled us on the side of the road, went to the taxi driver first. Right? Well, there was no problem with the taxi driver, he was just in a run. Right? Asked him for his ID, gave him the ID, right? Came round to me and shone the flash lamp in the face, right? And asked me for ID. And the only thing I had was this receipt for the little lad that came into the camp with a name, Gillen, on it, F. Gillen, on it. And I handed him that, told him that was my name, asked me where I was coming from, told him I was working in a sawmill in Newry, got something in my eye, and I was going home to Dundalk. And he just shone the flash lamp in the face, and I was pretty sure that they knew. He handed the thing back and says, go ahead. Right? And the taxi driver just drove away, and it was nothing to him. And I was sitting waiting. Everything goes through your head. Right? They know damn well they're going to blow me away. Right? And that piece of road. It's a no man's land almost once you go by that British Army road check, until that period, that road, and it's dark and it's lonely. It's frightening. We drove along that road, and I wasn't sure when we were across the border and that. And we passed the station, and the whole time I was waiting on them opening up on us. They didn't. Right? And we were driving along the road, and I said to the taxi driver, "Are we across the border yet?" And he says, "Yes, we just passed it there, past that garage." I says, "Thank Jesus, give us a cigarette. Have you got a cigarette on you?" Because it said to me on the way up the road that he played for Newrytown Gaelic Football Club. Right? So I knew he was a Catholic anyway. Right? And he said to me, "What's wrong with you?" I says, "I just escaped out of Long-Cash." Right? So he lifted his hands off the wheel and started to pat me on the shoulder and all the rest, and told me he was a Republican. Right? We got across the border, right, and he was more excited than I was. Right? Just as I got out of the car, the taxi driver gave me a complaint. He says his car was always getting hijacked and Newry could have done anything about it. I says, "Yes, I'll see about it when I get back." Right? So I walked along the road, into the wee pub, and the barman was there, who I knew, and there was a guy sitting at the bar, drinking, who I knew, a guy called Jerry from Belfast. I just walked into the bar, and I was stinking dirty, right? And one of my eyes was closed, and the other one was partly closed, and covered in sawdust. Right? And as soon as I walked in, he just set up a drink, a double whiskey. Right? He knew what must have happened, or he guessed what would have happened. Anyway, I told him. Right? So I went in the back, had a wash, cleaned up, and lay down and slept. About 2 or 3 hours later, the owner of the pub arrived with his whole family, a whole bunch of people. Right? And they were expecting a bus run down that night from Portadown, a bus run of Republicans. Right? So I was sitting in the back, got something to eat and drink. And about 10 o'clock or so, the owner of the pub got so drunk, I came on the news at 9 o'clock that I'd escaped. Right? And there was a big cheer in the bar. Right? And I'd said to the owner, "Don't be saying anything," right? But he got drunk, he got up on the stage and announced, that I'm sitting at the back. And he then trails me out and introduces me. So it was 3 o'clock in the morning, we were sitting drinking too. Right? The next day he went up to Belfast, collected the wife and kid, brought her down, and that was the escape.
Instead of enjoying his newfound freedom in the comparative safety of the south, within 10 days Hughes had recrossed the border and was back on active service in Belfast. 6 months later, in May 1974, Hughes was recaptured and sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, categorised as a prisoner of war. By the late 1970s, most of the people in this film were in prison. They continued to resist from behind bars.
I was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment in Long-Cash. I found myself in the cages and became more politically aware than ever in the cages, because there were so many lads from this area and from other areas, and we got together and we went over what went wrong, why we hadn't got the Brits out so far, why the truce broke, what we have to do, where we were, where we are, and where we're going. They were the main themes of education in the cages.
Most of the younger people in the early stages, 1970-71, as I say, seen themselves as soldiers, not politicians, and Sinn Fein was there to look after the politics. Right? We do the fighting, Sinn Fein does the politics. What had to take place was a complete change, a complete radical change within the whole movement. There had to be a movement going forward militarily, politically. Right? The people in that movement had to be politicised. There had to be a politicised rank and file within the whole movement. That was taking place in the cages. The British nicknamed it, right, or labelled it, the University of Terrorism. Long-Cash to me was the University of Freedom, University of Revolution.
The IRA, through a hunger strike in 1972, had won the right to political status. It was the British Army whom the IRA was fighting in ghetto areas and in rural areas. But in 1975, all that was reversed, and the British government built towards the policy of Ulsterisation and criminalisation, with the ultimate aim being normalisation. And Ulsterisation, in Ulsterisation, they pushed the RUC and UDR to the front and withdrew the British Army. And in criminalisation, they withdrew political status from captured Republican prisoners from the 1st of March 1976 and did away with political status. And this was meant to demoralise the Republican movement and the Republican struggle and Republican supporters, and also internationally paint to the world situation that it wasn't a colonial struggle, an anti-colonial struggle that the IRA was engaged in against an occupation force, but it was a criminal conspiracy. And these were all the key words of the period, masterminded by a few godfathers.
They brought us back to the camp, diverted us to the haste blocks, took our clothes and told us we no longer had political status. And I found myself in a haste block. We were ordered there to take our clothes off, right? Which we done, and they threw us a blanket. Right? That morning, when I was doing OC of the cages, used to go to the governor every morning, sit down. He used to offer me coffee every morning, which I always refused. They called me Brenton or Mr. Hughes. That night, when I got to his block and they took my clothes, threw me a blanket, they called me Hughes 704. Right? It was a complete change from that morning to that evening. It's now just a number. Right?
Republican prisoners, however, refused to wear prison uniform, and for doing so, they were effectively confined to their cells and forced to smear their excrement on the walls. A bitter struggle developed. By October 1980, Republican inmates were sufficiently desperate and determined to mount the first mass hunger strike for recognition as political prisoners of war. The fast, involving 7 men and 3 women, lasted 53 days before an agreement was reached with the British Foreign Office. But 3 months later, the agreement broke down. This precipitated a second hunger strike, in which 10 prisoners, including Bobby Sands, went to their deaths.
I remember saying years ago during the blanket and after the hunger strike, that no one is ever going to be able to tell this story. Nobody's ever going to be able to understand what it's like here, and nobody's ever going to be able to write it. There was something there. You had a group of people, a group of men, over a period of 4 to 5 years together, come through from one stage to the absolute extreme. And there was an almost loving comradeship developed over a period of years among those people. Something that to me is unique. That deep, solid comradeship. And I think the one impression that I always have is that they are all ordinary people. Right? A lot of the people who come through that, if they had not have come through it, right, would they been the same people? And what I'm trying to say is that that period, that suffering, right, that comradeship, that pulling together, that unity, brought about something in those people, in us, right, that we felt so tied, so committed to each other. I don't know what it is, right? And I don't believe those people were unique. I think the situation we found ourselves in was unique, and that brought about the type of people they were. Some people would refer to them as saints. I remember getting a small piece of paper in, and someone was saying that the people in the blanket were saints. Right? It's sloppy. Right? They weren't saints. Right? There was people there who were just ordinary. They done ordinary things. They missed ordinary things. You used to talk about sex, and they missed sex. Right? You used to talk about how you missed freedom, and then at night, we would have talked about the stars. Right? We would have talked about God. Is there one? Right? We would have talked about the beauty of the stars, the moon, or whatever. Right? And that whole period coming through all that, right? Just ordinary people with ordinary problems, but finding something that is absolutely unique, that enabled 10 people, right, to walk to their deaths. Right? And I think it's a struggle. Right? The struggle, an objective that you're after, and a belief in that objective. I think that is a lasting thing. Right? You feel weak. Right? We were all frightened. Right? None of us wanted to die, right? But we all knew the risk, and we were all prepared for it. And it happened. This country is occupied. It's occupied by troops on the ground, thousands of armed troops on the ground, and a police force that is sectarian and always has been. One of the tactics used was the commercial bombs to try and tie up the city centre, to bring more troops into the city centre. And if the IRA were putting bombs into the city centre, one, they were hitting the economic and the commercial interests of the people who were ruling over us. Right? They were hitting that. They were also drawing troops out of the ghetto areas into the city centre to protect those economic interests, because that is the main reason and that they're here, to protect the economic interests of the capitalist class, of the ruling class. Right? Occasionally, and sometimes it did happen, right, where bombs were put down into the city centre and civilians were killed. Right? Over a period of years, the British manipulated that situation, and on one particular occasion alone that I know of, they did not pass warnings on. Right? They say they couldn't handle it because there's so many bombs in the town. I don't believe that, because they can walk into a place like Ballymurphy, completely seal it off and search every house in it. Right? And they try to tell us that they couldn't empty the city centre. Also, it became obvious that they were using the situation of the economic bombing of the city centre to turn against the movement, to turn against the IRA. And the last people that the IRA wanted to hurt or injure or kill during the economic bombing campaign in the town were civilians.
Today, 20 years on, after nearly 3,000 deaths, at least 30,000 injured, and over 15,000 imprisoned, many more young men and women still feel that they have no alternative but to take up arms.
This is what the British have named the peace wall. What they say it is here for is to keep the two warring factions apart. The Loyalists are on this side, Republicans on this side. It doesn't stop the attacks. Constantly, again, these houses are under attack. Not just pepper bombs and paint are thrown. Often, UVF or UDA would open up with automatic fire, like here, a bullet hole coming through. The walls here littered with pockmarks of bullets. Someday, hopefully, and it's my belief and my desire that this wall will be taken away. We no longer have bullet holes, we no longer have pockmarks, we no longer have people living under attack with constant fear every single night of being attacked. The British would tell us that the Loyalists are responsible for attacking Republican houses and Republicans responsible for attacking Loyalists. The truth of the matter is this wall symbolises the British presence in Ireland, a division. They are the people responsible for this wall. They built it. They built the mentality that creates people on the other side to attack people on this side. The British presence, that is it. Brick walls, bullet holes, pockmarks, people living in fear. Many of my friends are dead, have been killed on the streets of Belfast. 10 of my friends died while I was in prison, and they were with me, or I was with them when they died. And I say to myself, what was it for? Right? Was it worth it? And people continually ask me, was it worth it? And I can say, right, that when this struggle finishes, when the objectives, when the British are removed from this country, when we bring about a 32-county democratic socialist republic, when the wealth of this country is handed back to the people of this country, I'd say then it was worth it, yes.
Probably there were times when I felt despondent throughout my lifetime in the Republican movement. But certainly my present thinking is that this is the greatest generation ever we had. This is the generation that's going to bring about freedom. And my determination is greater than ever has been.
relation to 69, I would say yes, that I'm more confident now than I was in 69, because in 69 it was a question of survival. Now it's a question of victory.
We can achieve what was set out to achieve in 1969. It may be a lot longer than what I anticipated, but eventually we're going to arrive there. And it's like the tide coming. Can't stop it.
There's no possibility of the struggle ever stopping now until freedom is achieved.
I think that armed struggle in pursuance of independence, I mean, it's quite legitimate and it's a necessary tactic. I think that when that national independence is won, and that when we have a social democracy here from which will emerge, hopefully, a socialist republic or a socialist system, I think that's when the armed struggle ceases. You can bomb and shoot away the British connection with a mixture of political action. You can't bomb and shoot into place an Irish Republic. That must be built using people. Armed struggle wouldn't be necessary, or wouldn't even, to my mind, be morally justified in those circumstances.
Remember this, that the Irish people for hundreds of years have campaigned, have fought elections, have tried every method to bring about their just aims, and every single time the reaction from the British has been with violence. And I certainly do not like using violence. I don't want to be involved in using violence. I think weapons in the world, if they can be taken out, would be a much better world. But until there's justice, freedom and equality in Ireland, there will always be violence. And as long as the British are here, there will certainly always be violence.